And most people, when we talk about hope and dementia, say, well, when's the next drug going to be developed? When's the cure coming? Hope, for most people, is getting rid of the problem. And as Deke said, A.G. Rhodes, and for a long history, has been dealing with this question of cure versus care and care versus cure. But many people, when I say there's hope in dementia, are saying to themselves, well, okay, where's the drug going to be and how long is it? So the history of drug development in dementia care, which I'm all in favor of, has been going on for as long as I've been in this business, 30, 40 years. And every year, they said 5 years from now, we'll have a movement forward. So that took place for about 25 years. 5 years, 5 years, 5 years, 25 years took place. And then all of a sudden, they started to say, well, it's actually 10 years away. It's not, so 10 years, give us 10 more years, and it'll be there. So another 20 years passed. And now the movement in the drug development area is saying we need to find out how to stop dementia before it even is on the horizon. Therefore, we need to be finding medications and other lifestyle changes for people 20, 30 years before there are any symptoms. Because once you have symptoms, it's too late, is the message. That means that I will not be around on this world when we find out whether that works or not, because it'll take another 40 years for us to find it out. So the horizon for success of those programs is way in the future. We have a problem today, and the problem today is all of you who raised your hand when Deke asked how many of you have dealt or are dealing with family members or with friends who have dementia, and there are many. In the world, there are 50, 60, 70 million people today with dementia. In this country, the number that's thrown out there is 5 million. It's closer to 10 million. And for every person with dementia, there may be 10 that people who are dealing with them, either as paid caregivers or as family caregivers. So that's another 10 times that. So we're dealing with 100 million people who have to have some direction in this field. I believe there is hope. And what I'm going to talk to you about is what I mean by hope and how all of you can participate and are participating and many of you are already participating in this question of what hope is. Hope in this field today is knowing you can make a difference. It's not only it's my definition. It comes from somebody at Harvard who actually wrote political slogans like "Yes, we can" and things like that. So that the concept of you can make a difference, hope, comes from him. But the concept that I'm working on, that many of us in this field are working on, is that each one of us, by the way we respond to people with dementia, by the way we engage people with dementia, the way we react to what we hear, the way we talk about the condition, can make a difference in the lives of people living with dementia. And when I talk about the lives of people living with dementia, I'm talking about people who are living with this condition for 15 to 20 years. Not the people in the last 2 years that are often pictured as somebody late in life or lying in bed or with great, great difficulty. But, for example, Charlie, you're dealing now with a group in a church setting of very early stage people. They're probably living at home, right? They're not living in an institution. So you can make it, and you're trying to make a difference in their lives by how you give them some meaning in their life on a daily basis. So hope is YCMAD, you can make a difference. It's a mantra. And we have to start understanding that YCMAD is the definition of hope. And I'm going to talk about why it's the definition and why it, in fact, and how it works. So what I'm going to start with is a brief trailer to a program through which, I met Deke before, but recently we've spent some time together. And it's on YouTube. You can all get it. It's 58 minutes long, and it's called Revolutionizing Dementia Care. So if you plug it in on your Google and say, find it for me, it'll pop up on YouTube, and you watch it. It's the first statement of what we're calling You Can Make a Difference Hope. It's the first statement that doesn't just say, oh, it's John Zeisel, or it's Deke Cato, or it's Charlie Battle who's doing this. It's a group of people. And what you'll see in this program, one of the speakers of which was here, was it last year or the year before? Last year, Al Power, who's also part of this movement, is that there's a common theme out here now, which is what people can do with dementia, not what they can't do. So we're no longer saying, if you do something with dementia, you won't have these problems. We're saying, if you are engaged in life, even with dementia, and that means all of us need to be engaged in life anyway, but even with dementia, you can have a life worth living. And that's really the goal of that hope.
It's hard. Your whole life changes in an instant when you hear those words that, you have Alzheimer's disease.
I put together a treatment team after I got diagnosed. I had my neurologist, my general practitioner, I had a speech therapist. I have a life coach who I see weekly. So all those people were involved in terms of my treatment.
A lot of mentoring is helping people to understand, no, you can't do all the things you did do, but you still can do a lot. You still have a lot to be thankful for.
People who are living with dementia should not be excluded from the rest of the society. That's just not right.
We have just been taken down a road in this particular family of conditions that the person doesn't have anything to offer. People are proving that wrong.
It's having the hope that you can make a difference in the lives of people with dementia, because we really know now that that person is still there.
In a person-centered model of care, we try to cater everything that we do to that individual resident's likes and wants.
When you're a great care partner, you're always anticipating that other person's need.
I've learned that you really have to look for a community that fits to the individual as opposed to the individual fitting to the community.
When you can find a place where your loved one can be and are treated with the kindness that you want, then that gives you this big relief.
Coming here, my mom can be who she is.
So how many of you noticed the guitar playing in that program? And can one of you describe what was going on there? Who was playing the guitar? The patient, the what? The two of them. And the patient, the resident was going like this, and this guy who knows what he's doing better than me was going like this. We had somebody come up in Virginia, in Richmond, I guess it was, where we had this after, we gave a talk after we saw this film, and came up to us and said, I didn't realize that I can play guitar. My father can still play guitar, because I can now go and play the left hand when he's playing the right hand. We don't have to do it. I don't have to say, hey, Dad, can you play it? And Dad said, hey, I'm not going to do it. So in this video, the 58 minutes, even in the short piece, there's lots of things going on that bring people to life. And there were lots of small indicators of what these paid and unpaid and family members were doing to help. You don't all have to jump out of a plane, by the way. That's absolutely not necessary to prove that we can still do things. But it is important to understand there's almost nothing that can't be done, and that's what I'm going to talk about more of. So we are facing, the reason this is important is that we're facing a bunch of different problems. The first one I call the Dyad Disaster. We put people with dementia into a little home with one other person who provides care, and there's an exchange. The care partner provides care, they get the burden back. Care, burden, care, burden. There's even something called the burden scale, because we know that care partners who provide care will be burdened, and the burden scale basically says at a certain point you're going to burn out, so we might as well measure the degree of burnout while you're starting to give care. As long as we define the care for people with dementia as being given by one other person, and death do us part often is what people quote when they say, well, I have to do this till death do us part, we are going to be burnt out. And there's, if I may, Kinsey Harper, we were talking before, and you were saying it's really important in your life and to understand that you have to find community. The answer to the Dyad Disaster, and that's really what you were describing, if I may, in our conversation, can only be overcome by organizations like A.G. Rhodes. Can only become like organizations. Is Sherry Beyer here from Jewish Home Life? She was going to be here too. Are you from? You're the sub. So Jewish Home Life, where we're also doing a bunch of I'm Still Here training. Thank you for being here. You know, these are communities committed to making a difference in people's lives and to bringing this whole I can make a difference, you can make a difference approach to care, and to not only to care, but to life and well-being. So that's the first problem. The second problem we face is the stigma syndrome, which is that people are so afraid of having dementia that they throw dementia into the healthcare. Well, we've got to have somebody who can fix it for us. And then it goes, the costs are huge if all we do is say it's a medical problem. And really it comes from lack of knowledge of how we can make a difference. And so the public narrative that's accepted by so many people is a public narrative of despair. Oh, we can't do anything about it. We might as well throw up our hands. Why are we even thinking about it? There's no cure on the horizon. And that despair is the exact opposite of hope. So we have to choose our public narrative. And that's really what I'm presenting today, which is we have a public narrative of despair, which you're going to see. I'll present it in a little slide. And it's very familiar to most people. And then we have this public narrative of hope, which in dementia is rather rare, but we're finding more and more people interested in it. And the PBS special that I showed you is the first one that only talks about hope. It only talks about what can be done. And even though you see people far into the condition, when you see them being cared for, it's with respect. It's with doing as little as possible so people can do as much for themselves. So the goal of I'm Still Here and the goal of hope is not only to keep people safe and healthy and functional. Anybody can do that. It's to give them, and people who live there, and we call them patients, the residents, a sense of who they are and a sense of self. And all of the engagement programs that you've heard about at AG Rhodes and at other places, whether it be, and I'll talk more about it, but whether it be, you know, Kirk's horticultural therapy or John Abel's music therapy, or whether it be art, that's only some of them, but there's engagement throughout that finds out who the person is and relates to it. Just yesterday, John, Adam, where are you sitting here? We were talking about, over here, we were talking about somebody, and we raised the issue no, it was somebody, anyway, at dinner, and he was saying, well, my sister or my brother doesn't do anything, and doesn't want to do anything, and we started to talk. And I said, look at all the things that we can know about your brother and your sister that are part of who they are, that will allow us to engage with them in a conversation, in asking them to help us do things. So the goal of all of this is to create their own self and their own story. Everybody has the same emotional needs. People with dementia and we all have the same emotional needs for respect, for being able to choose and to have control, to feel worthy, to give and receive love from other people, and to have a purpose. So we can get to those stories by meeting people's needs like this. And that's really what this I'm Still Here approach, what this You Can Make a Difference approach is all about. Finding out how to meet the deep emotional needs of people so they know who they are, so that we can have conversations with them and engage them, and they don't have the behaviors, in quotes, and they don't exhibit the behaviors that people say they are. Engagement is the trick to meeting these needs. It's another conversation I had while we were waiting was with, I have to have my notes here to get them all right, all the names, was with John Ross. John, wherever you are, here you are. And John was talking about how he did the Eucharist with people, and they woke up and they remembered things in this dementia program. And then he said, and what I end up with is a phrase which I would tell them all. He'd say, go mess with them. I said, that's what it's all about. Just don't leave people sitting around. Go mess with them. Engage them in a conversation, engage them in a joke, engage them in something they know, engage them in something you know. Show them paintings and saying, what do you think this painting is about? We've developed museum programs that we started at the Museum of Modern Art. They took it over. It's now all over the world, where we invite people with dementia to go to museums. We show them art, and we say, what's going on in this painting? And they will make up a story about that person walking behind the window, and somebody's looking through the window, and if I may use your painting, and they're looking through the window, and there's somebody gathering flowers, and they're coming back, and they're going to put them on the table. got a long story we could have in a museum with this one painting. So all of these are ways to engage people. This is in the Louvre. It's the Last Supper, obviously a different, not the Last Supper, but a Last Supper. When people are engaged in great art, in great music, in conversations, in sports, talking about what we were talking, I was talking with somebody else the other day, Clemson versus Notre Dame, or Clemson versus, then there was the Duke versus North Carolina. I mean, that'll engage people, not me necessarily, I'm a Patriot fan and Red Sox and stuff, so you guys don't understand about that, but because we win all the time. And so it's news to you. But that's what engagement is, and engagement meets these needs. So what I'm talking about is something called engagement replacement therapy. No one can really multitask. We think we can multitask, but we can't. And I'll give you an example in about a moment. So if we are really engaged in something that means something to us, we can't also be engaged in anxiety and agitation and aggression and apathy and the 4 A's of Alzheimer's. So really what we're talking about is figuring out how to engage people from morning till evening in interesting things. And Jocelyn talking about your past and everything you've done at the station. I mean, all of that's engaging and interesting. That's how we treat dementia. That's how we can make a difference. And each one of you, in dealing with your friends and your family with this condition, need to start thinking about how can I engage them. Then the question of how they're going to move from one city to another or how they're going to be taken care of becomes much easier. But engagement is the trick. So the public narrative is between, as I said, between hope and despair. If you have a public narrative of despair, it leads to fear and anger and a quick fix. Oh, there's nothing we can do about it. What are we going to do? It's really terrible that we're facing this problem. Who's going to fix it for me? Dementia needs a different viewpoint. With hope, understanding that you can make a difference, you get curious. You say, well, how can I, and again, I'm not just talking about one individual, how can I talk to my sister who doesn't want to talk about this? How can I engage her? What do I have to do to make my husband understand something, or to or do I really need to make somebody understand something? And then you become creative. And then you say, I got to figure this out. There must be some way. And so you start to talk to the person, and you find out what they really are interested in, and they really do care more about North Carolina and Duke than anything else. And so that's the conversation you have. And if they're further along in dementia, you can have that conversation over and over again. It's fine. I'm told that there was one game in 1973 that had some great play. So you find it on YouTube and you show it. That was somebody told me the other day, yesterday. So you also understand that making a difference in people's lives and changing the paradigm and changing the way we think about it is a slow campaign. This is not something that you just flip your coin, flip your fingers and say we're done. Kim McRae, sitting over in the corner, has been involved with culture change, as this movement, among others, has been known, in Georgia for over 10 years. And now we have a video. It took 30 years to get that video, or 10 years. And all of a sudden, we're starting to see it bubble up. So it's a slow campaign. Many of us who've been involved with this, and Deke, you've been executive director here for how long? But how long have you been working? For 10 years. You know, it's felt like an uphill slog, but we're finally at a plateau. And the plateau is to understand that we can make a difference. So what are the shifts between despair and hope? The despair model basically is a self-fulfilling prophecy. We always see the negative. Somebody has a diagnosis. We say, oh, the future, that's the end, that's the future. Future is anxiety, the future is aggression, the future is all of these things. So we abandon the person. We say, let's move them into a nursing home, and we don't have to go visit. We don't have to do anything. We look for a medical fix. And apathy, aggression, loneliness, all increase. That's the despair model. That is what most people, and that is what many politicians who are thinking about funding research in dementia are following. The other is the hope model. And what it says is, embrace the present. Be in the present. Don't say there's nothing wrong. Let's grieve if somebody has cancer. Let's grieve if somebody has dementia, and let's go through the grief. But we don't let the grief dominate who we are. We let the grief, we live with it, as we do with all things we grieve about, but we continue doing things together. We continue appreciating that person. We stay engaged, and we're getting people who are happier and calmer and more confident and more in control. And the goal of it all is that we have a better relationship with them. And with that better relationship, we can exchange things with them, we can learn from them more, and we can also care for them better. So as I said, the past used to be a lot of cure and a little bit of care off on the side. For many years now, those of us in this culture change movement have been saying, let's at least have care and cure on an equal basis. My belief now, and the speaker from last year, Al Power, has been teaching me things in our conversations. I now believe that the future is way beyond care and cure. It's into well-being. We have to be talking about the well-being of care partners, the well-being of people who are paid care partners in this business, and the people who are living with dementia. And care and cure is not really the issue. The issue is creating well-being in their lives and in all of our lives. And so it brings them into this human rights approach that says every person has the right to have well-being. So these are the well-being domains that Al Power lists, and he has a book in which he describes them: connectedness, autonomy, meaning, security, identity, growth, joy. There are many other mixtures of these factors and these criteria, but this is as good as any, and this is Al's, and so I like it. And it's important for us to realize we're talking about quality of life, fundamentally. And we're not talking about caring for somebody with an illness. We're talking about taking care of somebody's quality of life and trying to improve it. So one could say that I'm making this up as I go along, and that it's a nice idea, and it is a nice idea, but I didn't only make it up. There happens to be some science behind it. So one of the sciences is the neurosciences. Our brains have over 100 billion neurons. Now that's all the numbers, all the stars in our galaxy. It's also frighteningly the number of galaxies out there. So it's a huge number. And over the 15-year period of dementia, we lose 10, 20% of the neurons. If you lose 20% of 100 billion neurons, you still have 80 billion left. That's a whole lot more than the stars you see in the sky. It's a whole lot of stuff going on in there. And we're now learning that even the white matter that we thought didn't count, that was just in between, actually has memories and thoughts and things going on. So the first thing is our brains are a lot more complicated and a lot more interesting than we think. I pressed the wrong thing. That's okay. The second thing is that what we find, and this is my work in the relationship between various neuroscientists, is that our brains have evolved to be curious and creative. Those two terms I used under the hope narrative. So we are out there trying to figure things out. When you're a little baby and you, as we all know with grandchildren, you put something in front of them and they start to figure it out. Maybe they throw it up in the air, maybe they throw it against the wall, but eventually they say, I guess if you push this button, it goes forward or doesn't. We're all out there trying to learn and trying to discover. We are made to explore and discover. So if we give people with dementia the opportunity to explore and discover, they will take it way into the condition. And if you know what you're doing, and those of us who've been in this field for years and years and years, even people far advanced into dementia will continue to discover. It turns out that if you look at the history anthropologically, that Neanderthals, pre-human, pre-Homo sapiens, when they got to the edge of the sea, they went, oh, I guess that's the end of the world. Or when they got to the mountains, they said, I can't go up the mountains. When, however, they transformed from Neanderthals to Homo sapiens got to the edge of the world, got to the edge of the ocean and said, let's get on a boat and sail out there. There must be something out there. So what makes us uniquely human, and what makes people with dementia uniquely human, is this desire to learn, this desire to explore and to discover. And that's really what sort of the movement that we're all part of, and the movement that A.G. Rhodes is part of, the movement that Jewish Home Life is part of, and there's another group we're training out in West Cobb, Sterling Estates, which is another organization, is all about how do we create this humanness. So the third piece to the puzzle, and why we know that this is the case, is that we now know that there are embedded in our brains, when we are born, we're not born with a blank slate, we're born with a motherboard in our brain that already is wired for certain things. I'll note, it's called a motherboard, it's not called a fatherboard. We're wired, and we're wired to understand that the sun's warmth and nature is part of our hard wiring when we're born. You don't need to tell a baby when they're lying in the grass that it's comfortable and fun. Smiles and frowns, the way people look at you and the way facial expressions are hardwired. Every culture in the world, every society has the exact same understanding that when you go like, well, it wasn't a very good smile, but when you do this, it means you're happy, and when you lose, it means you're unhappy. And then when you go, ugh, it means don't eat that, it's disgust, don't eat that berry that you just saw someone eating. All of smiles and frowns and facial expressions, and being at home, so that the sense of home is hardwired, as is all of the arts. All of the arts are hardwired in our, this happens to be my grandson doing great art on the left, but also is touch. So we know that there's a neurotransmitter called oxytocin that when a mother, and babies are now put on their mother's breast, unlike when I was born, when I was taken cleaned up and given back, but now you take immediate babies, put them on their mother's breast, because we know that neurotransmitter oxytocin begins to be the bonding neurotransmitter that's important immediately upon birth. So in dementia care, we're often holding hands and touching people when we do it, because it's a connection. The other thing we know is that emotional memories, not that we are hardwired, that emotional memories take better hold in our brains than non-emotional memories. So this is when I learned to dance with Nancy Toby in the 4th grade it was. And she doesn't remember it, but it was very important to me. And I remember it in great depth. And then the others is me with lots of dark hair and my first son being born. So those emotional things, I know we can connect. When I have dementia, somebody will be able to connect with me very easily with those. So there are a bunch of despair myths that I'm going to go over with you that are just wrong, and they're part of what many people believe to be the case. And then there are the hope truths. So the first despair myth is that people with dementia can't remember. If we touch emotional memories, if we repeat things over and over again, not saying, my name's John, by the way, did you remember that? I had to write down the names of the people that I spoke to and that had something to say, because I don't remember those right away. On the other hand, now that I've met Deke X number of times, I will remember your name for a long time. So people with dementia can remember, and those of you who work in places or have gone to places with people with dementia and go away on vacation for 2 weeks are never surprised when someone comes back, you come back and they say, where were you? You weren't here for a while. You weren't here, where were you? Because they notice the absence. They remember you being there, but they can't say, I remember that you were here 2 weeks ago and you did this. Different kind of memory, but people with dementia can remember. The second is the question of no attention span. Oh, you can't engage people. People with dementia can't pay attention for a long time. They just need to walk around and do stuff. So the first program we started at the museums, these accompanied tours with people with dementia, was at Museum of Modern Art. And I will tell you that people would sit in front of a painting for 25 minutes to half an hour, and the care partners and the wives and husbands would say, but they don't sit here forever. They've never sat for this long. I said, you've never put them in front of a Picasso. You've never put them in front of a Matisse, and you've never said, what do you think this painting's saying? So people with dementia have a long attention span if they're engaged, if they care about what they're hearing. They can focus. Many people come up and say, well, I'm so pleased you take care of people with dementia. I'm living with my husband and my wife. They're not at the aggressive phase yet. there is no aggressive phase as part of dementia. What there is the lack of impulse control. In other words, that part of the brain is damaged that controls us. So when I drive down the road and I really would like to start screaming at the car in front of me and bump into them and do all kinds of horrible things, and I don't do it because I go to jail and be in trouble, I'm using that impulse control. People with dementia are not more sexual or more aggressive. What it is if you put me into a situation where I get angry, where somebody's in my face about something, and I get angry, I express that anger versus control it. That doesn't mean I'm more aggressive. It just means that we have to do more to keep people out of those situations where they might show aggressiveness, or undress in public where they shouldn't, because we don't do that. But somebody with dementia might have lost that impulse control. A fourth one is that people with dementia, you hear it all the time in the news, oh, it's the condition, it's the disease where people lose the sense of who they are. Nobody ever loses the sense of who they are. They may lose a sense of a name, they may lose a date, they may lose something. They know who they are. There is a sense of self, and you can always touch it. You can't enjoy them. People can't enjoy it. They'll just forget. So there's something called gist learning, which means I get the gist of it, and hopefully, my guess is that when you leave here, those few of you who remember what I say will remember the gist of what I said. People with dementia remember the gist of something. They remember the feeling of being someplace. So they may not remember exactly what they saw in the museum, but they'll know that they felt good and that they were in this important place and they saw this interesting art and they had a conversation. People with dementia can enjoy a huge amount. As I said, John, playing the music and playing the gardening and creating these flowers. That's a wonderful thing to do because people enjoy it. Whether they remember exactly what they did is irrelevant. Many people say people with dementia can't decide. We have to decide for them. If you say, would you like to have the chicken salad or would you like to have the tuna fish, and you show it to them, people can say what they want. You never don't have anybody. So one of the things we train on when we do training on dining is to Mr. Unidine, Adam, one of the things we train is always show people visually what the choices are. And even if, and then somebody said, well, if we know that they always like the tuna fish, why do we have to ask them? And the answer is because it's respectful to give people the choice. Even if they never choose the tuna fish, you show it both of them each time, and you always say, which would you like? Because just making that choice is important. And the last one is people with dementia can learn. We have two learning systems, at least in our brains. The first is called episodic, and it's what I'm very bad at. It's memorizing things. So I know that George Washington was the first president. That's about it. I can't give you what the third and the fifth and the ninth was. But I can. I'm pretty good at driving. I sign my signature very well. I actually think this talk I'm giving, which I've given before, not exactly in this way, but I'm getting better at that. So people learn not by something called procedural learning, not by episodic learning. It's how you learn sports. It's how you learn to drive. It's how you learn to ride a bike. Most of what we do well is learned procedurally. People with dementia learn procedurally. The example that my friend Cameron says when he talks about it is how many of you know people in a resident home or in a nursing home or a community like at Bremen House, and if you go and sit in the chair that they go and have lunch in every day, after only about 2 or 3 weeks that they've lived there, they will come up to you and say, "That's my chair." They didn't know it was their chair when they moved in. They just sat there 3 times a day for 2 weeks, and now it's their chair. Because people with dementia can learn through procedural memory and procedural learning. That's what we need to do with engagement. If you engage people over and over again, our brains get involved, and we remember and we learn from it. So all of the programs we deal with are learning programs. So a couple of just ending comments. There are things we can do to right now change our lifestyles. We now know what needs to be done. And the 3 basic ones are exercise, diet, and sleep. I will tell you, everybody knows, there's a lot of research that shows if you do exercise more, the dementia is reduced. Diet, we all know, whether it's a modified, whether it's a, some vegetarian diet, we know we shouldn't eat too much meat. So diet is pretty clear, not too much salt, not too much fat, not too much sugar. The big one in those three is sleep. Many people say, oh, I wake up at 3 in the morning, I go to bed at 10, I wake up at 3, 5 hours, I don't need more than 5 hours sleep. I will tell you that we all need 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And if you are one of those people who say, oh, I don't need more than 4 or 5, you're adding to the chance of having dementia. And so I now work very hard at going back to sleep when I wake up at 4 in the morning and figure out how I'm going to have those last 3. Sleep is really, really vital. The fourth one is stress, is reducing stress. The reason for reduced stress is that stress causes inflammation in our bodies. And the biggest contributor to dementia in our lives is inflammation. So stress reduction, whether it's meditation, whether it's learning how not to sweat the small stuff, whether it's finding your friends who are a real pain in the neck and saying, I'd rather you didn't call me. There's lots of ways to do it, but that's all pretty important. There's also, who was it? Somebody mentioned, I wrote it down, just a second, I have a name here. Monica. Monica, where are you? So Monica, when she was talking about this earlier, she said, and then there's also teeth. And I said, you said that, right? So I forgot, and I'm going to change this slide. Another one is flossing, because it turns out that inflammation in your gums is one of the most direct connections between inflammation and your brain. So keeping your teeth good is as important as these 3, 4, and 5. But the fifth one, the last one, which is really, really important, is meaning in our lives. It's why many people, when they retire and don't have anything in their lives to do, you see a decline. Engagement is not merely doing artwork is doing a little artwork. It's not merely planting some flowers. It's and just to talk about, or music. It's not merely listening to music, it's engaging in music in somehow. It's learning the songs, it's being able to recommend the songs. Many of the things that I saw you doing yesterday, because it becomes meaningful. You can also, for example, have a music club. So when there is no music going on, that club can meet and discuss and listen to some music and decide what they're going to be playing. So by being a member of a club, you are now in a meaningful situation, or a gardening club, so that you are always a member of the gardening club. It's not like you're a member of the gardening club on Tuesdays at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So there are many ways to creativity, become more creative, to have more learning. Purposeful meaningfulness in life is important as one of the basic fundamentals of making a difference. So making a difference, you can make a difference, means being engaged, engaging people with dementia, engaging ourselves. It also will help us to fend off dementia. It's the lifestyle changes. Turns out now that the Alzheimer's Association, as of last week, is going to have a lifestyle magazine now all of a sudden. And I will tell you that what they will talk about is, diet, exercise, sleep, stress reduction. Maybe they'll talk about brushing your, flossing more, as well as meaningfulness, because that's what it's all about. And that's what we need to bring, and that's the movement that this 58-minute film that I hope some of you go on to is conveying. It's what here at AG Rhodes, Deke is working, and David and team are working very hard to see move forward. At Jewish Home Life, again, the same thing. Many groups in Atlanta, and for some reason, Atlanta is a heartland now of this whole movement, says Ms. McRae over there in the corner, and it's very important. And we need to have whole cities move forward, because then whole cities change. Another one is Seattle, which has a bunch of very interesting stuff going on. And all of you are participating in this movement. And I want to thank you all for coming and tell you how important it is. And the last thing I'm going to do is show you, without details, the kind of research that we've done to say, here's the results. The results of engagement are a higher quality of life in those places versus others that don't have these kinds of programs. Is less anxiety in those places with these programs versus not. Is fewer falls, because falls are the most expensive problem. So if people are engaged in walking in an engaged way, there's much fewer falls. Less apathy. All of these are the elements that I was talking to you about as being able to cut through them. This is a reading program we have called the Book Club. So less depression, less apathy, more verbal communication, and more verbal communication that makes sense. Greater engagement and positive affect. These are the kinds of measures and outcome measures of doing the kind of programs we're talking about. And it's really what A.G. Rhodes is about. It's what Atlanta is about. And as I said, thank you all for coming, and thank you for participating and supporting this kind of work. So thank you.